Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport, related, in fact, very intimately with the questions of funding public transportation in New York City and around New York City, with the question of cars versus public transportation investment priorities, and the question of transit speed, namely congestion pricing. Now, the news is as follows, and I urge people to look at the ticker here. It is 7:11 in the evening, Berlin time, on the 8th of June, and news is changing very quickly right now because the announcement came, I believe, on the 5th, that Governor Hochul announced that she was indefinitely suspending the implementation of congestion pricing. Congestion pricing was to debut on the 30th of June, so this is an announcement 3.5 weeks in advance for a program that had been in the making since, depending on how you define it, either 2007 or 2019. So the effort to bring congestion pricing to New York goes back to Bloomberg, to Mayor Bloomberg, who got the idea when he was doing he was doing these international forums for how cities can combat climate change, and the answer, by the way, is they cannot. Policy is made by nation states, occasionally by international organizations that have some teeth, which is at regulatory level the EU. It's nothing beyond that, and even at the EU level, the national level matters more. So please, if you are if you're voting in the EU election, vote green. But it's more important to have green member state governments. But at any rate, one of the ideas that he got in these forums was the idea of congestion pricing. He got it from London, where Mayor Red Ken Livingstone pitched the idea to him. And from Bloomberg's perspective, Livingstone's domestically radical politics did not matter very much, just the concept of mayor of a large global city did. London, in turn, began doing it in the early 2000s, I believe 2003, I'm not sure. It got the idea, in turn, from Singapore. Singapore started doing it in the late 70s after a report by Smead. Is it Smead's report, or is it Smead? Yeah, Smead report. R.J. Smead believed correctly in, let's call it, risk compensation. So his idea was that the only way to reduce car accidents was to reduce the amount of driving, essentially, whereas if you just made roads safer, people would drive more. The observation was that as the roads were becoming massively safer through the construction of motorways, car crash death rates actually increased because people drove more. On congestion, he likewise said that building more roads would not reduce congestion because cars would fill the roads back. That's a theory of induced demand. I don't know if he coined the term, but he was the one who kind of brought it into academic and policy research, and he recommended congestion pricing in the UK. It was ignored. Singapore did it in the 70s. The UK got it back from Singapore in the early 2000s. It was generally an era of elite learning between London, or the UK in general, Singapore and Hong Kong. The explosion in construction costs in the non-US Anglosphere in the era, I think, comes from that as well. But congestion pricing is, at any rate, separate, and then New York got the idea from London. It failed politically in 2007, and Bloomberg Bloomberg tried to pass congestion pricing, but he did not politic to the satisfaction of certain power brokers, like New York State Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver. He was representing the Lower East Side, so his district would have greatly benefited from congestion pricing. Silver privately supported it. He intended to vote for it in the assembly, but he was not going to twist arms for it. And New York state legislation works on the basis of what is traditionally called three men in a room: governor, state senate president, and state assembly speaker. And the latter two have the ability to twist arms to get things passed. Silver, in fact, has a pro-transit history. He was the guy who got the funding for Second Avenue Subway Phase 1. Again, three men in a room model, so at the time there was him representing city Democrats versus the governor, George Pataki, representing suburban Republicans. And the agreement that they made was that the MTA would get money to fund both Second Avenue Subway for the city, eventually for his district, but phase 1 was the Upper East Side. Again, he was Lower East Side, so it would only benefit in phase 4. And he said that he's okay with this phasing as long as everything is eventually built. At the time, in 2000, it was expected that that the 4-phase Second Avenue Subway would open by 2020. And the suburbs got East Side access. We need to stick it, and we should stick a pin in that, because that's going to be important for something about present-day congestion pricing issues. But at any rate, Silver was not going to twist arms for congestion pricing. His district was around here, unless Bloomberg did whatever, do state machine politics that Bloomberg didn't really come from. So it failed, but planning continued. There were some different ideas for maybe some kind of congestion pricing light, things like tolling the free bridges. But the idea got developed over the 2010s, and eventually it got to the point that in 2019, I'm not going to say it, by 2019 it became clear that it must happen. By 2019, instead, plans got to the point that MTA finances became dependent on it. So there were it's gonna beat phase 1, but not by a large margin. How are the costs looking? The elevator costs, the elevator costs are otherworldly. Phase 2 is also expensive. They're actually starting to save a little bit of money there, but a lot of the really bad design decisions were made long ago, so fixing them now is saving money, but it's not saving a lot of money. If they stick with the fixed designs, the smaller stations, and do everything from the ground up based on that idea in the future, they can actually start reducing costs. But, I mean, why would they do it? And I'm not saying why would they do it, they have money. I'm saying why would they do it? Look at how the state is treating, or sorry, how the governor is treating state planners. And it's not even the political appointees are repressing. It's not even an issue of political appointees repressing civil servants. The political appointees do not know about this development either. So the late 2010s effort was very revenue focused. So for example, usually congestion pricing is not levied overnight, but in New York, the plan was to also levy a cost overnight. It was, I think, $15 daytime and I think $5 nighttime. And Eric was talking to people at the MTA about the goals for congestion pricing. Is it about reducing traffic? Is it about shifting from? Is it about model shift from cars to public transportation? Is it about environmental benefits? But they were mostly interested in it as revenue generation to increase capital funding for the MTA, and especially do it on a regular basis. There's this issue in the United States going back to the 60s where public transportation needed funding. It needed subsidies, and every time they would find some opaque source of funds for it, and then costs would catch up, and then said, wait, we need dedicated funding. And at this point, there are, I believe, 11 different dedicated funding sources for public transportation in New York. Uh, and so the idea was to do a massive funding source for capital, not just operations. Uh, because usually with capital, it's, for example, federal funding, which is not guaranteed. You need to apply for it and it's competitive. Um, so the idea was they would generate at least $1 billion a year. In fact, the law requires them to generate $1 billion a year. Uh, there was a 4,000-page environmental review, which is currently in litigation, but as I understand it, the position of I don't know what to even say, whether it's the state at this point or the MTA, but like against the anti-congestion pricing litigants, as I understand, the legal position of congestion pricing on the environmental lawsuits is strong, which doesn't mean that people won't sue, but uh, there was no expectation that a judge, for example, would uh, cancel congestion pricing pending further review at this point. And but it became very controversial, and it's something that always happens with congestion pricing as well as road diet or bus lanes or bike lanes. They're unpopular, and then they happen, and then they become popular as people realize that the fear of a business apocalypse is not going to happen. Much of the opposition to road diets, much of the support for automobility in cities comes from small business owners who drive. In fact, Hochul, in her announcement that she's canceling congestion pricing, that came 3 days ago, and as I said, everyone was blindsided. The head of the MTA, John Lieber, is a political appointee. He's not at all a professional. He's a lawyer. He's not, for example, career engineer. And he was only informed about it 2 hours in advance. So the governor did not do this out of some kind of broad-based movement that called for stopping congestion pricing. Again, there was a lot of opposition, but the opposition kind of figured it's going to happen. We lost. In fact, they still think that. They still think that it's going to come back after the election. And so, at any rate, they're obligated to raise $1 billion a year. I think most expectations were that they are going to greatly exceed that. I think maybe it was $1 billion a year in current dollars from the 2010s. American government budgeting is done in current, not constant dollars, so just a little bit of inflation is going to make every number larger than what the law said. And of course, the costs are in 2023 dollars at this point, or year of expenditure dollars at any rate. But also, I think I've heard larger numbers that they had very conservative estimates. How do they compare with Silicon Valley BART Phase 2? Higher, I believe, but the station spacing is denser. There are 3 stations between 96th Street and 125th Street. They're going to build 106th, 116th, 125th. So 3 stations in a little bit less than 3 kilometers. And the San Jose subway, the BART to San Jose extension is, I'm forgetting how many, I think it's 4 stations in 8 kilometers, and this matters because when you have very high construction costs, usually the stations are the culprit. The station costs vary much more than tunnel costs. Much higher, like, I think the estimate from early 2000s, the effort that Silver was involved in, the estimate was phase 1, 200,000 per weekday, each subsequent phase another 100,000. Phase 1 was at 160 on the eve of Corona. It usually takes a couple years to reach that, so all likelihood was that if there had not been Corona, then phase 1 would have reached projections and maybe slightly surpassed them by now. I believe that there are newer projections for phase 2 and they're higher, maybe 160 as opposed to just 100. I have never even seen that video. I don't know. I genuinely, like, I follow a lot of both Brits and Americans mocking Britain discourse, but not on video, only on text-based social media. Um, anyway, but also speaking of congestion pricing, my understanding is that the dump issue is that in the UK, London is fine, and then the rest of the UK isn't, and due to NIMBYism, they're not building enough London, if that makes sense. So it's not that congestion pricing is making it a dump or anything. Quite to the contrary, that's a policy of the place that's successful within the UK. And but anyway, the opposition to anything that is, I'm not going to call it anti-car. Congestion pricing is not an anti-car policy. It is a pro-car policy. It gives the drivers something which is faster roads. It clears the roads of the most marginal, low-value trips. These trips are then moved to public transportation, or they are shifted to less busy times of the day, or they just don't happen. And then people driving into city center get faster trips. It got to the point that people who drive into the city for a living, by which I don't mean taxi drivers. There's a specific carve out. I'm forgetting what the exact rules are about taxi drivers constantly crossing the congestion zone boundary, which was set at I think 60th Street. So there would be quite a lot of cab trips that would cross that boundary, just because people do constantly take taxis in uptown Manhattan, not just midtown and lower Manhattan. There's much less cab traffic in the outer boroughs. If the boundary had been all of Manhattan, I think fewer cabs would be regularly crossing, but it's not. And as I understand, there's a maybe you only have to pay once per day, not once per trip. I don't remember. But I don't mean these. I mean delivery drivers, people delivering furniture, people delivering not anyway, deliveries of big things, not things that you can do on a bicycle. And also people in the trades. So an electrician is not generally going to take public transportation in the United States, even in New York where it is available. The electrician will drive, even into Manhattan. And part of it is power tool, but part of it is the electricians can afford it. You can afford to drive, so why not? And so said electrician is going to have to pay $15 extra to deliver, to go into the congestion zone or through the congestion zone for work, but it's going to be a faster trip. The electricians are not poor. Electricians get paid quite a lot, so this is a trip that's part of a work in city center, for which they get paid rather well, to the point that on the basis of their per hour wage, they benefit from paying the $15 to get where they're going faster. That's pretty common for people in the trades. So the traffic that would get shifted out is, again, things that are extremely marginal, things like a judge who lives on the Upper East Side drives down to work, which is court in Lower Manhattan or in City Hall every day, because he's a judge. He gets free parking, and of course he can take the 4 or 5 trains, but he would need to move the car 4 times a week for alternate side parking anyway. So might as well move the car and get to work at the same time. This is not a hypothetical. This is this is a specific judge that I met once, just because I know a family, I know a relation of theirs, and so the family member that I know literally gave that example as extremely marginal trip that probably would not be happening if there were congestion pricing. So don't think of these marginal trips as trips taken by poor people. Poor people don't drive into Midtown or Lower Manhattan, and so it would guarantee drivers faster trips, and yet drivers are skeptical of this. Drivers, or rather, they're skeptical before it starts happening, and the drivers treat it in the way that they treat genuinely anti-car policies, like taking away lanes from cars to set up bike lanes or bus lanes. And the thing is, within cities, pro-car interests and also, again, anti-congestion pricing, because congestion pricing, again, is generally supported by people who are against cars and opposed by people who like cars. These are usually small business owners, plus people who I don't know how to define exactly in class terms, but I don't know, Diego, if you're watching, it's people with a "we are not poor" identity. So it's not lower middle class. It's maybe upper working class. The best UK expression for this is Essex man. So it's people who are working class but are better off than most people in the working class and have a very strong "we are not poor" kind of identity that often leads to hostility to the politics of economic equality. So Essex, Essex man was kind of infamously voting for Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, despite earning incomes that were probably below the British median. Just because there was someone who was, let's say, in the 40th percentile of the income distribution, but due to upward mobility, mainly, compares themselves, usually it's themselves, it was a kind of gendered stereotype. The Essex girl was a very different and not at all political stereotype. Compares himself with the 20th percentile. In much the same way that you sometimes have the situation where people in the 90th percentile of the income distribution compare themselves with the 99th percentile, and then vote accordingly, which might not even be which is always going to be kind of weird, because the 90th percentile earner who compares themselves with the 99th percentile will first of all think that they're struggling. There are people who say that it's difficult to live off of $150,000 in New York or in California, and sometimes it's even farther up, like 200,000. People will say, "I only earn 250,000," and not even in the sense of maybe it's not someone who's saying, "Oh, I'm in a career track that is paid very well, so relative to what I do, 200 to 250 is low, and most other people in my position get more than that." Like, senior people in tech now, 250 is, I'm only earning 250, I can't afford things. Again, people like that exist. So it's the combo of that, but also maybe not being opposed to the idea of redistribution of income, but also extremely hostile usually to the idea of just paying higher income taxes. Because wait, why are you taxing me? Tax a person couple income percentiles higher. So again, it's kind of weird politics, but it's the combo of small business owners and people in the working class who, for whatever reason, have I'm not like the other workers mentality. And again, I think the people in the trades in New York are a big part of it. They're not 40th percentile earners. They're more like 80th, 85th. So for example, driving is a way you're showing that you are not poor. You don't need to take the bus. This is absolutely a thing. So these interest groups rage against anything that either is or looks like a government restraint of their consumption of cars. Small business owners also drive pretty much always, and then they think that everyone else drives as well. It's really common. It's not just an American thing. There are examples of this in a bunch of European road diet examples, not even just congestion pricing, where there would be business owners in Vienna who would say, "Wait, you can't replace the parking here with you can't replace the parking here with bike lanes. My customers need to drive." And then you ask those store owners how many of their customers they think drive, and they will mention figures, and then you average them out, and then you check the actuals based on travel survey, and way fewer people way fewer customers actually drive. It's not actually common for a customer in a city like Berlin, Vienna, Paris, New York to drive to retail, for example. Maybe in the very outer parts of the city, sure, in eastern Queens, the North Bronx, yeah, sure. Outer parts of Berlin, yeah, sure. But that's not where the road diets are focused on. The road diets are in Berlin within the ring, or in the more central parts of New York, or if they're more outer parts, they're still in neighborhood centers. So it's not like they're not road dieting Little Neck. They're not road dieting Whitestone. If they're road dieting Eastern Queens, they're road dieting specific centers around Jamaica and Flushing, for example, or they're trying to do bus lanes in between. So again, very different. And even Kew Gardens Hills, I mean, people walk to retail. So the business owners are just misinformed on how people travel, and they keep predicting apocalypse if the city or state government does something adverse to their own driving habits, and then the city or state government often does it over their objections, and then they realize that they were wrong, and they're getting a lot of customers right now because it turns out that it's nicer at consumption level, and maybe that's not something that business owners cares. Business owners cares English grammar. Not something that business owners care about, but their customers do, and then business improves, and often they recant. Not always. In Berlin, one infamous example that even affected city politics was Friedrichstraße. There was a pedestrianization project on Friedrichstraße that was pushed by the Green Party in the last coalition, and it was perceived as a failure by the local business community, and they reopened the street to cars under the current government, which the CDU-SPD one, where CDU came first in the election on a promise to be car friendly, to make Berlin car friendlier, and the road diets and the the car lane to bike lane conversion project, and reopened Friedrichstraße. But I think that's just a bad timing with Corona. Usually projects like that in the last 20 or 30 years have not been perceived as failure and have been followed up by more. And yeah, some people fume. People are fuming at Anne Hidalgo from the suburbs, but I mean, it's not going to shift back. So with congestion pricing, again, it's usually small business that opposes that. Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. It's marginal, as I said, it's marginal trips, things involving alternate side parking. And this, at any rate, became a political flashpoint. There was a lot of opposition in the suburbs, and also on Staten Island, and as a political move to try to remove the issue from the upcoming election, the governor announced very last minute. Again, congestion pricing was not even an if it will happen issue a month ago. There were articles being printed about what it will be like, not what it may be like. It was considered a done deal. And then the governor blindsided everyone and said that she's canceling it. Again, the state legislature voted in favor of it. It's unclear to what extent the governor even has the authority to cancel this, because at this point, the rule is that these organizations need to approve of congestion pricing. So the MTA does have the right to toll its own bridges, which are not every route into Manhattan, but are the ones that already have tolls. The others are city. And so there is the legal right to toll these, but it has to be spent on road construction based on generations old highway lockbox rules passed again by the aggrieved drivers, often of 110 years ago. So consent is required. The Federal Highway Administration is going to give it. The federal government was assuming congestion pricing was going to happen. The MTA wants it. Essentially, it boils down to one specific person, to one specific appointee at New York State DOT, there's Jose Dominguez, who can withhold consent. All of these are veto points. There's a ton of veto points. This is the one that may say no. Whether the governor has the right to direct that is up in the air. But the point is that you can litigate the cancellation. And again, it's unclear at this point who's legally in the right. And the MTA, for example, is not treating their own case as airtight. So they're saying, look how bad shit will happen if this gets canceled. They're not saying, nope, this is not canceled. So again, this is being litigated, and we're going to talk about the litigation because there are people who know this better than I do, and these are the ones literally in the Twitter thread that I have on. So David Meyer, Paul Williams knows this very well. Nilo always. What? Okay. So yeah, there's also, I mean, the other person you might want to read on this is Ben Kabak. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so I want to talk. So anyway, these are the news, and I want to explain some of the analysis on it because, as I said, I said that we should stick a pin in the history of congestion pricing. No, in the history, not congestion pricing, in the history of Second Avenue subway as a horse trade between the city Democrat Sheldon Silver, since convicted of corruption, and the Governor George Pataki, representing suburban Republican interests, who wanted money for commuter rail with East Side access. Now, I bring this up because Arpit Gupta, who I generally think very highly of, has pointed out that most of the congestion pricing money is going to go to the city, not the suburbs, but most drivers into the city, or rather, most drivers into city center, who would be paying this are from the suburbs, not the city. And he was trying to portray it as some kind of inequitable thing that led to a kind of and I mean, Arpit supports congestion pricing. It's just that it's just doing the thing of like supporting it, but kind of understanding where the opposition comes from. And I don't think he's right on this because, again, East Side Access, like, I mean, many instances of the state just funding suburban transit without congestion pricing money or without special taxes already exist. The share of the LIRR and Metro North in public transit subsidies and capital funding greatly exceeds their share of transit riders. East Side Access was supposed to be a $3 billion project and is, I think, 12. And I think it opened for about 12. And ridership-wise, it is significantly... It was always known to be a smaller project in terms of ridership than Second Avenue Subway Phase 1. Right now, the net ridership impact looks to be zero. It did not increase ridership on the LIRR at all. It shifted ridership from Penn Station to Grand Central. It was supposed to raise net LIRR ridership, and it did not. You cannot see it in LIRR ridership statistics. Like, ridership has been increasing as corona recovery, but it's been increasing at the same, perhaps an even slightly faster rate on Metro North, which did not get any such project. So it's not that the city is... it's not like the state is moving money from the suburb to the city on that. Separately, the reporting that I've read is that the district the congressional district that the Democrats were most worried about, leading to the cancellation of congestion pricing, is not even the suburbs, it's Staten Island. Staten Island's always kind of a weird congressional district. Uh, the I don't remember if it flipped Republican to Democrat, or if it flipped red to blue in '06 or '08. It flipped in one of them, and then it flipped back in 2010. I'm forgetting when it flipped back to blue, maybe 18. And it's been a very close district. New York is not a gerrymandered state for Democrats. Traditionally, they gerrymandered for incumbent protection. When they did, maybe they should make sure there are more Democrats in Congress. Came to happen. They didn't really try hard enough, and they they passed maps that judges appointed by the same state politicians ruled unconstitutional, and then they didn't try to do anything more with that. Oh yeah, okay, it flipped in 18 and then back in 2020. Okay, because I know that I heard that is the seat that they're worried about. That's a target seat. I didn't remember if it was a shore up or a retake, or a hold or a retake rather. And again, they didn't gerrymander the district to be bluer or anything like that because New York State doesn't do that. And so that's not a suburban district. That's not a district that you buy off through funding the LIRR, because LIRR, Staten Island. You don't buy off Staten Island by investing in public transit there, because Staten Island's public transit, like rail investments in Staten Island, have the too big or too small problem. If you do anything on the Staten Island Railway as it exists, it's completely useless for most islanders. It's certainly not going to be affected by congestion pricing because that's entirely internal. I mean, if you try to do something like extend the subway to Staten Island, that's huge, but it's also really expensive. Or the thing I constantly cry with commuter rail of taking the Metro North spine into Grand Central and then turning it into a north-south S-Bahn or a rail line, and doing a line that goes Grand Central, like suburbs to, I guess, Harlem, then Grand Central, which pre-exists, then they go Grand Central here, Grand Central, Union Square, Lower Manhattan, and then just tunnel under the harbor. And yeah, it's a long tunnel underwater, but they can do it. I mean, they can't, but other people can. Like, it's not the world's most difficult construction or anything like that, and New York is a very large city. And Staten Island does have very long commutes. That is something that would certainly appeal to Staten Islanders, but I mean, that's going to hog an entire capital at their current cost. And so, so this is not something that you buy off through rail investments. That said, this is something you buy off through congestion pricing. Congestion pricing actually is a net benefit to certainly people who are taking public transit from Staten Island to Manhattan, because such people, if they're taking a bus, they are going to have less congestion on the express buses to Manhattan. If they're taking train to ferry, I don't think it's going to matter very much. If they are taking train to subway, I mean, the subway's getting better funding through congestion pricing, so that's already a benefit. But if they're taking road-based transportation into Manhattan, they are benefiting from congestion pricing. These are not people who you bribe through capital investments in the suburbs, because never mind that Staten Island is in the city, not outside of it. If it were legally in the suburbs or something, that still would be a bus to the city, and therefore faster buses are automatically good, or Staten Island Railway to ferry, which you can't meaningfully invest capital money in it. That's very OPEX oriented, the ferry. Or bus to subway, and again, that gets subway funding. So what it looks like is that the congressional Democrats plus Governor Hochul panicked, about something that they thought was going to be popular for them, the cancellation, and it's not. It's making them look like idiots. It's making the governor look weak. It's making the governor look capricious. It's making the governor look completely out of touch. And this is while she is canceling a policy that is not even popular. It's just um, the at this point. I mean, every politician wants people to think that the politician agrees with them. So Hochul needs me to think she's going to do congestion pricing, and she needs to make people who oppose congestion pricing think that she's not going to do it. Now, eventually, that cannot last forever because eventually, it has to go into effect, and then it becomes clear. But one of the issues with the unpopularity, I think, is that the different groups mistrust the government in different ways. So while it's not around, certainly while it's in this kind of limbo, I think it's probably dead. But people who think that, or the people who oppose congestion pricing, think it's going to come back after the election. Newsmax, that's a Long Island newspaper, is criticizing Hochul on this. So the people who she should be, or maybe the people who she maybe thought that she would be appealing to, are instead of thanking her for this, or saying, it's really important that we do whatever we can to work with the governor to cancel congestion pricing, they don't believe her. They don't believe the state Democrats on this. Why would they? They saw a massive flip-flop. I mean, if you're, I don't know, if you're sleeping with someone who is married, and I don't mean like polyamorous, I mean someone who's like supposed to be monogamous and is cheating on their partner with you, and that person is telling you, I don't like my wife/husband, I'm going to divorce them and marry you. I mean, run away. That person's going to do the same to you in a couple of years. And that's what a flip-flopper does. And it's not even the kind of flip-flop that there's any way to shore up. And what I mean by shore up is Mitt Romney had a reputation for flip-flopping when he was running for president in 2008 and 2012. But there were ways that he could shore up support for certain things. So specifically, he had flip-flopped on abortion and gay rights. He was visibly pro-choice, and I don't know what he exactly said about support of gay rights. Maybe it was just civil unions, or maybe it was actually full marriage in 2004. I don't remember. But as governor of Massachusetts, he campaigned as rather socially liberal, and then he needed to dump those positions when he was running for president in the Republican primary. Now, on abortion at least, there was a way for him to shore himself up, which was to promise that he would appoint conservative judges. I believe the expression at the time was judges in the mold of Scalia. That's what George W. Bush said in the 2000 primary. I don't remember what Romney himself said. I know that Rudy Giuliani, who himself needed to do the same flip-flop, from pro-choice as mayor of New York to anti-abortion, running in the Republican primary in 2008. What he said was that he really likes George W. Bush's appointees. I'm forgetting whether he said Roberts and Alito or just Alito. Roberts, of course, has since been the most moderate of the conservatives. Alito, the opposite. But he said, I really like George W. Bush's appointees. I'm going to appoint judges like that. And now, abortion politics in the U.S. is mediated through very long-standing groups that are very politically informed and can translate. So if you care, then your local either pro-choice or pro-life organization will be able to tell you, yes, Romney may have said different things as governor of Massachusetts, but what matters is the Supreme Court, and if Romney wins in 2012, then he's going to appoint judges who do not believe there's a federal right to an abortion, because of, and that was maybe anchored also to the political party, the Republican Party, And so the flip flop, yeah, it was viewed as a character issue, but it's not like everyone believed that the man lied like he breathed. People notably did not believe that of Romney. And Hochul, I don't think, has the ability to have similar guarantees. Um, Now there are long-standing pro-public transit groups that could interpret, but um, first of all, these groups have no reason to say her. Second of all, um, because the announcement was so abrupt, it it means that these kinds of interpretations lose value. Um, with Romney, it was very simple. He's a Republican. He is running within the good graces of the Republican Party, as can be seen from all of the from the fact that he won the 2012 primary with relatively little difficulty, with the endorsements of even in the primary, certainly after the primary, the entire Republican Party and all of its elected officials, all of its party elders, various power brokers, ideologically conservative magazines, and so nobody would be blindsided by, let's say, Romney wins in 2012 and then nominates a, a justice like, I don't know, let's say Gorsuch or Coney Barrett, just because I know of them, but, or Kavanaugh, but I mean, maybe they were too young at the time, but I mean, judges with those politics, that would not have surprised anyone, because again, it's something that's so deeply embedded into American party politics that it's very easy, I think, to in Romney's case, change position to what is expected of you within the party. And congestion pricing is not like that at all. This is not something that Biden is running on. This is not something that the National Democratic Party is running on. This is something that Hochul played a key role in passing. This is something that the state government did. This is not something that you could even say, well, the opinion, well, I was representing a district or something. A lot of politicians change their views between when they, based on what they represent. So, for example, you can have a congressional representative in the House who will then either moderate or, I'm not sure what to say, it's never radicalized, but base eyes, be more like a mainline liberal if Democrat or mainline conservative if Republican, their positions. So for example, Kirsten Gillibrand ran more to the left, and I think is also legislated more to the left in the Senate than she did in the House, and people will just say it outright. I was in a more conservative district, or I was in a more liberal district. That's well understood that, yeah, you represent the district, and that's fine. And I mean, also, when you move from governor of a state to running in national politics, so if you run so if you're a governor of a safe state, you will have to moderate your positions. If you're a governor of a state that's exactly the opposite of the usual politics, again, Romney, then you will have to kind of come back to the base, and it's well understood. And the thing is, Hochul is not running for something different. Hochul is not running for president. Hochul is staying as New York governor. This is a New York state level decision, and yeah, there was federal political input into this, but note that the FHWA is not going to be, BAT is not going to withhold approval. Even though FHWA administrator is a federal political appointee. This is a political appointee of Biden, but Biden is not going to say, ex cathedra, cancel this. Instead, it was entirely behind the scenes, and because it's behind the scenes, it doesn't seal the deal. It doesn't say there will not be congestion pricing in New York. It says you cannot trust the government of New York for shit because they will yank promises. Their promises are worth very little. Just if you're ever trying to do business with them or in the state, you should know that there is no policy certainty. That is the ultimate message, and this is why there's criticism of Hochul from every direction. And I'm gonna see if I can find the meme. Is that opinions left or opinion left? No, it is not this one. No. This one. Where is this? Yeah. No, people are literally making these memes about how literally everyone is hating the governor over this. And yeah, like, I mean, this is, like, I don't know what to even call it, DSA at this point. This is, like, center-left actors. There's no right in here, but it's New York. What Republicans? Like, the Republicans are not a party in New York in the sense of, like, a political party that's trying to win elections and become the governor and become the government. They exist, sure, as various think tanks, but the think tanks are not throwing Hochul any lifeline on this. And maybe is independent and is not independent. And not independent politicians since they're politically independent. I mean, they're still registered with the party, but they're not trying to be a state majority. So yeah, they're against congestion pricing, but they're not going to throw Hochul a lifeline either. So yeah, no, this is how hated she has become. Because again, it's not about congestion pricing, yay or nay, her decision. I mean, the immediate effect of the cancellation is that if they can't find some kind of legal face-saving tool that means that congestion pricing happens over her objections, all that is saying is you can't predict anything the state will do. If you want to do business in the state, let alone with the state, you should not ever bother with trying to do good work. It is not rewarded. Politicking is rewarded. Cronyism is rewarded. That is essentially what this is saying. And yeah, of course people who are not cronies hate that. And I don't mean pro-congestion pricing people are not cronies hate that. I mean anti-congestion pricing people who are not political insiders hate that as well. The small business owners and the global equivalent of the Essex man, they're not poor, but certainly they're not political insiders, and they certainly don't identify that way. Like they like policy certainty too. I mean, Maggie, who the Essex man voted for, was very clear about what she was doing. Is the thing, and anyway, that's what I think is happening with the politics of congestion pricing. I don't know if they're going to be able to finagle a way to say, well, the state gave consent because the legislature voted for it, and technically NYSDOT is an independent agency, and the governor cannot literally direct Rodriguez how to vote. Again, I'm probably way too legal realist to be able to interpret it based on the letter of the law, and I also don't know the politics of the New York State courts well enough to know how it will hold up there. If there are different interpretations of whether the state gave consent. If people have questions, by the way, I will answer. We can make this a short video, because I was not going to even stream today, but then the news happened. This is a rather short. Lag. So I don't know. Do you have a question, Koki? And everyone else can just type. I mean, if you're But if your question is going to be TLDR, let me know that you're going to ask a question, so that I don't close the window on you while you're typing. I can eat marzipan chocolate while you're typing though. If people wonder, this is the brand. This is not a paid promotion, by the way. There was discussion yesterday that congestion pricing is good to fund capital projects because it's a tax on land rents, whereas payroll tax is better for operations. Agree, disagree? I honestly don't see the difference. Like I honestly don't see the difference. The issue is not payroll tax better or worse. So first of all, the important thing about congestion pricing is that even though it's being treated as a revenue generating tool, it is not. I mean, it generates revenue. It is a way of optimizing not land use, but car use. Congestion pricing does not do anything about the majority of urban land that is not roads, for example. So I would not call it a land use thing. It's specifically a way of rationing cars through price in order to permit the highest value traffic to move faster. The highest value traffic is not in this case the traffic carrying the richest people, because the buses are very high value traffic. The cost of operating a bus for an hour is much higher than that of operating a car for an hour. And the bus is a bigger vehicle, has a professional driver. The bus costs a very large multiple of one car. So it's things like buses, high value commercial traffic, like again the aforementioned electrician, and less very marginal trips that could be done not at all or at different times. And as a byproduct, it generates revenue. But you should not ever think of it as primarily revenue generation. Generally, if you want to generate revenue for the government, it doesn't matter if it's capital or operations, you want broad-based taxes. So income taxes, sales taxes, payroll taxes is functionally the same as an income tax. At subnational level, sometimes it is different based on whether you're raising taxes based on where people live or where they work, and that, but that depends on random legal definitions of the rights of subnational governments, and it doesn't always generalize. It doesn't even always generalize within the same country, because, for example, in New York, it matters because the state gets a large number of commuters from other states, but California does not. Conversely, other states that have very high volumes of inbound commuters from other states relative to their size, like North Dakota or Rhode Island, maybe are not in the same position because the reason maybe you would do a payroll tax in New York and not an income tax is that you're trying to essentially screw over Jersey, like screw over people living in Jersey working in New York, and because New York is a very specialized center and the Hudson is a hard boundary, these commuters have fewer options, so it's more of a free roll, whereas Rhode Island also has a very large volume relative to its size of inbound commuters from the neighboring state of Massachusetts, but maybe Providence is not in the position to do so, because if Rhode Island did that, people from Fall River would just, employers would just relocate from Rhode Island across the state line. And the same thing with North Dakota and with Fargo and its suburbs in Minnesota. So so the specifics of how to tax, that's often just a matter of a very specific interstate boundary issue, and even a matter of which country you're in, because, for example, Germany is a country that's highly federal. By most measures, Germany has more empowerment for the state government, the Länder, compared with the federal government. than American states do, but German states don't have tax autonomy. German states can levy taxes, but a very small proportion of German taxes are levied by the states. Instead, there are federal taxes that are distributed to the Länder by formula, in order to create more social equality, and as a result, the spread, for example, in teacher salaries between the richer states, by which I mean Bavaria, and the poorer states, like East German states, or the more deindustrialized Western states, like Saarland or something, the spread in teacher salaries, education being a state responsibility, it's there, but it's not very large. It's much smaller than the spread in average teacher salaries between American states, for example, let alone within states, because in the United States it's not a state competency; it's school districts. Well, it's much more local. But in general, you want broad-based taxes. You want if you want to only tax rich people, then you want to have high income taxes on very high incomes. You want to make sure that these taxes also fall on capital income, which is the exact opposite of the trend in taxation in the last generation or two, in which the taxes on capital income have fallen dramatically. So the situation in Europe, for example, is that the income taxes are rather progressive, and even the sales taxes here are pretty progressive, because the sales taxes are maybe less progressive than income taxes in isolation, but it's not in isolation because staple goods are exempt. So the broad-based taxes here are progressive among wage earners. So I, as a high-income salary earner, pay a rather large share of my income to Olaf Scholz. However, capital income is not taxed at these same rates. Capital income always has various discounts, plus a lot of weird legal tricks for moving your income between different countries until you find the correct tax haven to book profits in. So you want to do base burdening. You want to, if you are worried about tax incidence by social class or income, then you want to also make sure to tax passive income. Again, capital gains, dividends. But you want a broad base. You don't want taxes on very specific things to fund your government, because these are more opaque and they're easier to waste. For example, if you have a profitable state railway, which Prussia did in the 19th century, the Prussian state railway was state-owned, and you're using profits from that to fund general operations, then governance quality will suffer, because you're not going to need to develop the tools for broad-based income taxation. It doesn't matter if you're doing it on capital or operations. What you need is base burdening, and if you're trying to reduce inequality, then you still have broad income taxes. You just have higher rates on higher incomes, and again, also make sure the rates are high on capital income. Beyond that, I mean, again, it's not like the payroll tax is superior to income tax or vice versa. They are fundamentally the same thing. Congestion pricing, again, is good for very different reasons. One of the reasons, by the way, that it is good is that it does good things, but these things don't cost money. It doesn't cost money. I mean, yeah, it costs maybe a little bit to be able to collect, but congestion pricing generates revenue. But that is a side note. That's almost like saying you're going to fund your government out of fines on polluters, or out of a carbon tax. It's the same thing. The purpose of a carbon tax is to realign producer and consumer incentives with social incentive, with social goals on climate, or like with reducing climate costs, essentially, the cost of catastrophic climate change. It also generates revenue, but that's not the main purpose of it. I mean, don't throw the money away, but don't try to fund government out of that. if that makes sense. Um, does that answer your question? Sure, no problem. Are there other questions? Yeah, short lag again. So. In general, by the way, the other thing about it, congestion pricing may be better than your average narrow tax. Thanks for watching, Simon. Because one of the things that make, um, not one of the things, probably the most important thing that makes broad-based income, and by income I don't just mean earned income, I mean all income plus consumption taxes, what makes these superior to narrow taxes, um, is in part that these are very offensive taxes. They are right there. You see them taken out of your paycheck. Um, I mean, maybe you get paid after tax, which is kind of the norm if you're a regular employee in Europe, or even in the US there's withholding, but you're aware of how much more money you would have if this tax didn't exist, and that kind of forces the government to spend to spend the money prudently. It's not the only reason. The main reason is you want to not create economic distortions. Like if you're funding the government out of a profitable railway, which again 19th century Prussia did, then you also end up incentivizing people, incentivizing underdevelopment of the railway because it is being taxed. Essentially, like or rather, you're incentivizing passengers not to take the railway because the ticket fares are used to fund government. Maybe you're incentivizing the state itself to invest in the railway because it generates profits, but you're incentivizing passengers not to take it. And the same is true of a lot of other random taxes and fees. If you're taxing tea, you're incentivizing people not to drink tea. So you can do it if you're trying to reduce alcohol consumption or cigarette consumption, or in this case, driving into city center. But the problem is that if it's not based on something that is very consistent, then you're incentivizing people to lobby the government instead of to produce. So with, let's say, alcohol taxes or cigarette taxes, the negative impacts of cigarettes on public health are extremely well documented. So what happens is, starting in the 50s, it becomes clear that cigarettes are harmful for the health, and over time it becomes clear that they're harmful in ways that the previous generations couldn't even imagine. So that it's not just lung cancer, it's other kinds of cancer and heart disease, and there's secondhand smoke, and it's also addictive, and so because the public health impacts are extremely well documented, it's not about lobbying because public health is a well understood social goal. And it's the same with climate change. Climate change is not something that was invented yesterday. So because there's scientific almost unanimity on the subject, that's what makes these taxes more developmental, and this is also true of congestion pricing. So congestion pricing is very offensive to the driving public, so it's harder to waste the money compared with, I think, a financial transactions tax, which is very easy to just lose the money in the cushions, or between the cushions rather, and it's also, well, not being broad, it's based on something that's very well known. Remember, the tax has been debated 15 years. The cancellation was last minute, but the tax itself was not. It's not something that, for example, Cuomo was even more of an I will do things whatever, whenever, and in however way I choose, and you peons can't tell me, and the man got away with that until 40,000 people died, and also several women came forward and said that he had assaulted them. He wanted congestion pricing, Cuomo. He couldn't just make it happen. It still needed to go through debates and very extensive studies. So the program itself was not capricious, but Hochul's cancellation is. And again, you can kind of see what happens when the state is governed so capriciously. So thank you for watching. And I will see you once again. I'm not sure if in 3 days or a week in 3 days. I am flying to the United States on Friday, and I am not free on Saturday to stream. So we'll see when I get to stream next time. So thank you, and